Okay, so let me know when you all have it. And actually, I'm going to grab some flow paper. Be right.
I'm good when everyone else is.
I've not gotten it yet, but it'll just probably take like a second.
Yeah, Max, just let me know when you're good.
Just got the doc, let me download it. I'm good.
Great.
Great, I'm good.
Cool. Derek, are you good? Awesome. Text states about banning lethal autonomous weapons designed to target or launch nuclear weapons. New lethal autonomous systems will go nuclear strike. Will target the nuclear second strike systems that cause accident to launch and preemptive strikes from the U.S., Russia, and China. Clary 19, the arms racing is perennial for the great powers' efforts to lead to excessive and destabilizing arms builds. So race and autonomy pose a particular danger. Investing in machines with authority could prove catastrophic in their haste. States might field weapons with autonomy well before their abilities have been determined, resulting in uncontrolled escalation. China, Russia, the U.S. will still will deploy autonomous weapons. Accidents and mishaps are inevitable. Autonomous systems will be accorded greater authority, heading to a time where humans are involved entirely. Another danger rising from the speed, along with coordinated groups. The Pentagon envisions drone ships are related to release to search for submarines and the ballistic missile launchers. Adversaries rely on this second strike to deterrent should Russia or China pursue the swarm. U.S. drone threatened second strike systems. Those countries should launch their missiles, analysts, and arms control, joined with diplomats and others have designed strategy for banning them entirely. The new nations are determined to field weapons quickly. The policymakers must use this moment to weigh the advantage of the total ban. Automated anti-sub warfare causes nuclear escalation and use or lose that. That's Clary 19. The Navy is exploring swarms of autonomous robotic weapons. Arms control advocates fear the fully autonomous weapons would reduce human oversight and would weaken barriers to restrain escalation from nuclear war. Sub wolf pack of sub hunters provoke the captain to launch his weapons to avoid losing them to preemptive strike. And insecure second strike motivates automatic response and produces arms racing. That's Horowitz 19. The states feel that they'll secure and their safety or advantages to automation, speed, and precision might not appear worth the countries whose arsenals are insecure may be more accepting of Versa, may be more likely to automate early warning deployed autonomous delivery platforms, automated target selection, or shift towards launch postures. And the nuclear war causes extinction or won't stay limited. It's Edward 17. The climatic effects of nuclear war faded from climate scientists use improved models. Hundreds of thousands of weapons might be lost. Temperatures will drop to 12 degrees, far less seen since during the ice ages. Smoke would inhibit photosynthesis, cause crop failures, famine, ecological destruction. The effect would be similar to giant meteor responsible for the extinction of dinosaurs. Would be the dinosaur supplies control their future access to and likely in exchange with stay limited. Russia war causes extinction. Regional nuclear wars don't. That's Cotton Barrett 17. Every nuclear war between the U.S. and Russia, the aftermath would be much worse. 4,000 weapons, making it possible to grow food. That of extinction would be great. Exchange is only possible between the U.S. and Russia. 90% of the world's weapons are unlikely to lead to extinction. Exchange is more possible between for a conflict between the U.S. and Russia. Independently, states will automate nuclear responses. The integration causes extinction. That's Marine 18. The AA holds the most parallel in how to use nuclear weapons. Advances are on a fast track. The U.S. is in an arms race with China and Russia. The leadership is essential to ensure that AA does not destabilize nuclear command and control. The consequences are essential, but autonomous nuclear command and control might not be easily. It might be easy to dismiss as not realistic. That passes probably the Cold War's riddled with near misses when accident miscalculation to computer is almost a nuclear war. So if you consider deploying fully automated retaliation, a doomsday machine that AI is projected to change the world within a very short time frame. Experts agree that machine learning should enhance, not replace, so human decision making must be a central tenet of nuclear command and control. Most important priority, immediate priority must be to ensure that rapid advances during the command and control of nuclear weapons, not to relinquish it to an automatic doomsday machine. Arms racing commercialized the APT operation that caused the rogue spoofing and early warning attacks. This Johnson 19 advance could exacerbate cybersecurity challenges by enabling offensive machine APT or dramatically reduce the resources and technical skill required to execute a hunting for weaknesses against hard nuclear targets. That tools enables a low skill and restrained hacker to exploit a narrow window of opportunity when docked air gap nuclear substance become increasingly vulnerable to new generation of low cost black market APT cyber attacks. AI machine learning target and autonomous early warning systems heighten uncertainty and tension may impel militaries to put their nuclear weapons on high alert status. Worst case scenario thing may spark inadvertent escalation. Autonomous loss launchers cause extinction. Any single attack is critical to total launch of every weapon on Earth. That's a weapon 19. The nuclear nations have inadvertently created a doomsday machine with 15,000 nuclear nuclear weapons reprogram targets include main cities. One nuclear blast could trigger one nuclear war can do is unimaginable firestorm combined with a high altitude debris would reduce sunlight for and detected causing drought, winter, and global famine and catastrophic impacts on all life due to intense UV with the destruction of the ozone. Risk of mistake is very high because the US and Russia keep each keep 900 warheads ready to fire for minutes with only a few minutes to evaluate a warning when mistaken. Trigger disaster. Automated cyber retaliation increases vulnerability and causes miscalc. That's Johnson 19 autonomy itself might increase vulnerability to adversary could use malware to take control of autonomous systems. Offensive attacks would use the execute and difficult to detect distributor. Counter cyber operation is misinterpreted as offensive attack and reject defense to automated C3 modernization is disproportionately vulnerable. It causes NORAD spoofing. That's Johnson 19 applications to nuclear force with mainly weapon systems vulnerable to cyber attacks, spoofing, hacking, and jamming can infiltrate nuclear weapon systems. Control new command and control intense time pressures loom large and cyber attacks would be impossible to detect. Authenticated tribute NORAD would have less than 3 minutes. New tech designed to modernize nuclear C3I systems can undermine effective deterrence and each cause extinction. Style in 17 the cyber attacks could compromise nuclear planning, allow an adversary to take control of a new uncertainty, jump crisis stability, seeking to start nuclear war. The terrorists could use cyber attack to disrupt or EWS and spoof a nuclear attack failure of a NORAD computer to win by a result of farce warning about attacks and their effects be caused by cyber attack. And only total ban solves that's Johnson 20. Blurring cyber offense defense will compound fear of preemptive strike and increase first mover incentives to trigger use them or lose them situations. The Chinese analysts view NC3 cyber infiltrates high escalatory threat, even modicum uncertainty about effectiveness of AI augmented cyber capabilities during crisis would increase incentive strike preemptively. Systems inclined to assume the worst cyber attack and infiltrate nuclear system, silence communication, gain control of command and control perception that this capability exists would be inherently destabilizing. Mark Hardy inherently destabilizing good solvency. There's no circumvention for evidence specific to a partial ban. Calamore 20 the instead of broadband. The new international committee should focus on restrictions on the high resource weapons. Narrow focus would increase the likelihood of global agreement. The new restriction should be relatively easy at minimum. Governments could collectively agree to incorporate autonomous weapons in all applicable seaborne treaties with a single greater willingness without a requirement to resolve conventional payloads. Risk of great powers far greater than any deterrent advantage already gained. Banning the highest risk autonomous weapons could provide a foundation. The law ban has decades of precedent through other international legal statutes. That's Doctrine 20. The lethal autonomous weapon systems engage targets without meaningful human control precedent for each of the elements of the constructing legally binding instruments. Are part entirely new approach to law and principles and inform the structure of a treaty on fully autonomous weapons when negotiations start facilitating crafting language. The general obligation requires maintaining meaningful human control of the use of force prohibitions, ban the development, production, and use of weapon systems, specific positive obligation and aim to ensure that meaningful human control is distilled decision-making technological and operational components. Additional Protocol 1 to Geneva Convention, Cornerstone Civilian Protection, Arms Trade Treaty, and numerous conventions of banning specific weapons precedent from international human rights law and international environmental laws. So useful for the support for the obligation terminology proposed for the treaty. Framing the standards by respecting well-being, seek shall ways or any frame of Part 15, reducing essential risks of the most support their children, children, and future people will be consumed 0.01% weight, non-consequential is not to be the latter matter, minimally possible version of deontology and versus X must be considered with promoted good, thus apply strong risk to reduce existential risk, and 9% sure data reasons for moral uncertainty to reduce existential risk. Yeah.
Good for cross.
Yep.
So just to clarify, or actually, yeah, let's talk about the plan text. What is a weapon designed to target nuclear weapons, and what's the bright line for defining that type of weapon?
Well, so there are certain lethal autonomous weapons that can be explicitly used to disrupt an adversary's second strike capability. So, for example, our Clare evidence gives the example of anti-sub warfare, in which kind of
okay, just like as a thought experiment, like throwing out the terms lethal autonomous for a second, when we're talking about weapons that are designed to take out, to sort of target nuclear weapons, would like a pistol that I use if I walk into like a CNC center to like take out operators and take control of the nuclear weapon, would that be a weapon that's like targeting nuclear weapons?
No, because the weapon isn't explicitly designed. Like, there's no pistol manufacturer that says this one is the nuke killing weapon, right?
Are there any manufacturers that are saying this one's the nuke taking out weapon?
Our ev says that there are weapons being designed for anti-nuclear sub warfare, designed to sweep the seas for nuclear subs and then target them to disable.
Which manufacturers are producing them and which countries are buying them?
So the Clare evidence says that the Navy is already exploring these kind of swarms of weapons that would do so, and it's highly destabilizing. There's also evidence we read about the possibility of drone swarms that can be used in order to take out and kind of decapitate an adversary's second strike capability, which is also highly escalatory and makes Russian and Chinese.
Why are drone swarms in like sort of like autonomous like conventional laws that can like target silos, etc.? Why are they like specifically distinct from other types of like UAVs that like
because they're specifically designed, like they have like programming and targeting and like designs that are specifically.
Yeah, I get that they're programmed to target like.
It's not just programming though; they're designed like These drone swarms are intended for.
I get that they are intended and designed to
strike.
take out nuclear arsenals. I'm just curious, why is it the case that other like non-lethal autonomous weapons, i.e. UAVs, cannot be designed and programmed
Because
to fulfill
no one
similar
is
purpose?
no one is making a UAV that is like, this is the one we use to eliminate the nukes, which is not the same for the weapons I've listed. That are specifically being developed for nuclear.
Wait,
to
then
eliminate
if like the
nuclear
manufacturers are making millions of dollars off of laws that are designed to target nuclear facilities, and if UAVs could fulfill a similar purpose just slightly less effectively,
No, it's
would
not
they
that.
like switch?
What? That I'm not sure how that works. They would if you just move to some technology that is not at all designed and try and use it to eliminate nuclear weapons, that would be horribly ineffective. Like, it does not provide the same deterrent abilities and does not signal the same things. Like, no state moves from anti-sub warfare to like UAVs and thinks it has the same effect. It is not militarily strategic.
Okay.
And it does not make escalation as likely.
Oh, I got 5 minutes. Okay, I'll just send up the NC.
How many sheets is it?
It's going to be one off case. There's a second off at like the bottom, but I'll only read that if I get through everything on case.
Cool.
On case though, there's going to be like a framing page and overview to the advantage, then line by line.
So do you mean like you're going to line by line the framing page I read, or are you going to read it?
No, there's going to be like an overview on the framing page. Then there'll be, you can just flow like one page for the framing page, one page for the advantage. So I guess what you have for the app.
Sure. Okay.
And it said the doc's going to say around 5 neg. That's just me typing the wrong number. It's the right number.
Okay.
Let me know if it's good. Everyone good? Sweet.
Sorry, I need a sec to download and open. Okay, I am good.
Sweet. These women are trying to meditation to form maximum survivals in which their bodies become utterly tools to sustain humanity, short for use of session, potential reproduction, potential 15. Strategies to make reproductive capacity, reproductive relaxation, shattered to dominate every Western notes, reproductive imperative and women's responsibility station to reproduce reproductive function, existence, discourse, extinction, embedded heteronormative value, reproduction, also reduce reproduction to imperative survival, and real systems and outlook on the world, which privileges patriarchal thought and necessities, the exclusion of women, if the international sphere should be rejected, Rodney and Peterson, 91. The real symbolic neutrality, separate outside ideological circles, is the reason. And it was about women in order domestic status against disorder and early traditional society. This renders women is invisibly central noble and high quality domesticated failure so much real simplicity as for irrationality to reveal so much abdicate nor is a pressure to bring back some remains control reason making his dominant's ability to find it what is real is rights and assumptions about the will the vision come true constant reproduction narrative and passion spatial this are offer nothing but representation of reality and a gendered understanding of states as differentiable units in a hierarchical system correctly explains IR realism is wrong and appeals to its neutrality are the result of an oversaturation of masculinity within IR. Show 12. The gender market, they can replicate a structural theories and are analyzed perspective on smoothly map up in the population international structural theories. They try to take their perspective to represent the human gender civilization and characteristics exception because masculine, as masculine here are also not reducible minerals. Sees anarchy which has unisex and function gender constitution unifunction is supported by the degree to which is the European government their identity of policy and gendered ways and self-and against their nation and nationalism studies demonstrate gender is essential to defining the identity of the number of stations to go for the United States. So I don't know to the time that masculinity gradually defeating the Iraqi military would rescue the feminine state to go away from the hyper masculine or walking state social honor, even sacrificing physical integrity, understand honor without reference to the past and feminine conception of Belgium, honor 1940s, not to giving violence to territories, feminine honor tried to theory into coincidence the following factors refer to the way that Belgium's survival, cannot account for Belgium's action, factors, social influencing station, only not particularly natural and gender hierarchies or social feature global politics to find the system constituent units and organizational practices or social relation to the reproductive and hegemonic masculinity or against the pretender, others show can result in your relation to feminism in different ways, gender, nation, national identity, confluences, war making, kind of organization, diplomatic relation, international organization, different gender, nationalism, different visually functions, synthesis, and diversity, knowledge, job, map, one-to-one, capabilities, and on the gender shapes, state identity, and the apps focus on flashpoint escalatory violence of the Korean the apps focus on flashpoint escalatory violence is not neutral. Prefer a view of war and that the continuum of gender violence is intricately intertwined with the war. I mean, this is the consistent causal variable. Best social science data votes negative for Go 14. Best ability warfare starting conservatives of quantitative such as strong consistent correlation between domestic gender inequality and seizure result. Conflict violence studies where the gender inequality is a predictor of conflict that is not outweigh democracy, equality, surface, fence, no support for civilization, concepts in human biology, psychology, and culture, and character produce universal counter biology members, more value than culture, and tradition, feminist literature, positive connection between patriarchy and warfare fighting. Patriarchy is imperative to overcome more violence, opportunity, can be military balance with theories and governing ideologies systemically intertwined. And the alternative is to reject the act in favor of an ontological revisions of the deconstructed myth of masculine Western society the way it coheres mainstream IR. This is not a competing theory of the world, it is a method used to find and build that competing theory through the destabilization of the masculine subject. Go 4. Mission and analysis of the affairs of method construction, reality of thinking, and not to the defend for ontological revision and recognition that necessary reason and to power racial relation that form the reality nature. IR self-control taking to account gender, epistemological limitation to reproduce overriding malicious part of the reason of the resistance to analytical relevance of feminism, not surprising because into the shadow of the society to hypology limited in Afghanistan, right? Illustrate the fundamental revisionism, and kills investigating masculine needs to reflect politics, and hierarchies the structure socially adding with the disables the addressing is such a bad head-on could help. Case page. Interpretation of how when sees an object of research may center the debate on the consequences or scholarship of the object to clarify and to justify both the causal consequence of the plan of the research process. This means that winning length is the ethicality of the scholarship sufficient but negative data. It just proves the desirability of the research process. One, representation shape reality dependence from proposed and vacuum method orientation term issue policy get justified and implemented the world of proposals results in the Middle East have vastly different consequences if justified and human inherent crisis versus justified to shift resources to another region to submit US hard power to implications. Same scholarship is the gateway issue to consequences that when you see committed masculine visions of bio directly impacts our understanding of how the world works and dictates the accuracy of their predictions and methodology which may kind of interim necessary even if they wouldn't plan focus because the key to determine the consequences of the plan harsh with that. Make sure the reviews and get managed or by the norms and scientific with the probability and various replicators or needs. Against the word record make sure the repeated after conservation themselves they often show the session make results and some recognition is also better their own research. Key point shifting discussions debate with solution oriented focus into the research process of poking holes and dominant ideas key to constructing accurate analytics to view the world from which is superior to effective scenario analysis to show we're going. Then we secure the positive of their house of product research history small not self control attention equal to provoke discussion debates consider feminist and figure discussion of thought some of different approaches to the win of the narrative generate arguments history missing compromises to fairness often so that they can still with the causal consequences and representation justifications research models because they can we just get to contest those things as well and make sequencing questions where scholarship comes first if they can defend core predictable assumptions that act like realism true or extinction focus good they don't just have your valid well constructed NC makes minor imbalances and also prioritize massive educational benefits no for the one errors one a top level to the advantage if we win the realism link they lose the case I'll name cards AP Johnson relies on human perception of cyber operations is offensive because of a lack of information about foreign intent this relies on a zero-sum conception of state need and powers that leads to states assuming the worst B point AC Horowitz relies on a realist understanding of relative gains and balancing to explain automation in some states motivates arms racing across the board. C point disproving realism also takes out their second strike. Insecurity internal, the only increasing offensive posture, they only increase offensive posturing if realist understandings of how deterrence works are true. The advantage proper, two top level framing issues. One, they only get rid of out of the loop weapons. On the loop does not solve at all because if you have a ton of AI making virtually every decision within a computer, but an operator has the decision, sort of the ability to stop it, they are obviously not going to if every piece of sort of accurate input data is telling them to launch, which means 9 out of 10 times they're not going to stop nuclear's first strikes. Secondly, just sort of vague definitions as to what lethal autonomous weapons count as threatening and targeting nuclear weapons means that they're all going to be endless alternative causes to second strike destabilization. Things like UAVs and non-lethal autonomous weapons that can still strike missile capabilities are just going to be sort of they're just going to replace laws in the status quo. And their own evidence has their advantage to take the development of AI that could reasonably threaten second strike capabilities to have complete control over arsenals is speculative at best. And part and parcel with securitization. Johnson 19. This is a recutting. Non-nuclear state credibly threatens survivability development, be theoretical and subjective. Even if there is a risk of far future development, that's a reason to throw out their cyber vulnerability cards because that assumes status quo cyber defenses and status quo cyber offensive capabilities, but that can't be projected far from the future. And no integration into the US NC3 systems. Freeberg, actually skip that card, go to the circumvention stuff. Playing a circumvention to a lock of major consensus definitions was a prerequisite solvency. Great powers will purposely frustrate any attempt to pass the plan Canada Civil 20. Australia, Russia, South Korea, UK, US, Britain, for ban laws, and by leading the creation of common definition, providing a definition of the differs considerably from one another, contribute the assertion, stopping an effort to harmonize definition, and the understanding of autonomy, like a combined understanding for effort to agree on well as one working definition, so rather than draw clarity on terminology would be necessary as a precondition for a binding institution. Their tertiary evidence is wrong. Its citation of ambiguous terms like meaningful human engagement and a lack of a clear bright line about what the fuck a weapon designed to target nuclear weapons even is means that clear-cut precedents set by past arms control policy that the evidence cites obviously doesn't apply to the affirmative. You can skip everything else.
CX.
Yep.
Status of the alternative.
Unconditional.
Unconditional.
Yep.
Okay. I guess how can FemIR explain things like the development of AI generally, since it was developed by private companies and not like not necessarily states?
Well, like obviously, like private companies play a role in the military capabilities of states. We would argue that the AF's understanding of international relations is still state-based, as is our understanding of international relations.
You didn't answer my question. I'm asking how your theory can explain the development of artificial intelligence by private companies. You just repeated the
sure.
link,
yeah. Certain states define their national identity through forms of masculinity that necessitate having certain technologies. That might include AI that would like encourage military
How do they
capabilities.
define masculinity through tech? Like, how is AI a masculine technology?
Well, you should read our Schoberg evidence. Our argument isn't that like a technology is masculine. Rather, our argument is that sort of states have visions of themselves and what their ideal
right. You just
should
repeated
be
the
through
states.
visions. Can I answer your question?
No, because you just repeated the states link. I'm asking about private companies.
No, obviously, private companies are not the ones that launch weapons that take out nuclear arsenals. They sell them to military-industrial complexes. They sell them to like state militaries. Our argument is that the reason state militaries want to buy those weapons and the reason why like your advantage has postured their uses of those weapons as destabilizing is because they define their identities through sort of masculine conceptions of national.
Sure, but that's because like Google and Facebook were like, hey, let's make AI. And then the government was like, oh, hey, whatever, it's fine. Let's talk about the alternative. What does it mean to like embrace an ontological revisionism? How does that result?
So you shouldn't think of this as a fiat action. On the sort of framework page, we have like impact turned the idea that the way we think about the world and think about problems in the world should always been solution oriented. We have made arguments that research processes in and of themselves are intrinsically valuable because that allows us to
answer my question about what an ontological revisionism is. I get your framework argument, but what is an ontological revisionism? And how?
Okay. Ontological revisionism is the process of undergoing revisionism, i.e. destabilization and deviations away from how we currently conceive of the world being, etc., i.e. sort of interrogating, pointing out assumptions within sort of current theories of IR, the world, etc., identifying what those flaws are.
How can that resolve material violence against women?
So our argument on the framework page is there's a rep-shaped reality claim that indicates the way we view the world and the ideas we use to frame our actions influence the causal consequences of those actions. We say that ontological revisionism is a necessary prerequisite to identifying ethical frames through which to justify our actions.
Okay, so then how does ontological revisionism explain the development of artificial intelligence?
Well, ontological revisionism is a research process. It's not an explanatory theory. Schoberg is
but then how could you apply ontological, if it's a research process that is an alternative model of research, how would it approach the research project of artificial intelligence?
Firstly, we would say that like the links that we've read give pretty good ideas of how we should like interrogate the sort of scholarship and contextualization of AI on the affirmative. But secondly, I think our Schoberg evidence gives a pretty good explanation of like the way we understand how states interact and use AI. So we should use that to frame our understanding of AI.
Cool. I'll start prep. Okay, stop prep 307 left. F307. And I'll send it out. The order will be like the case page. Actually, wait, I'll take a little more prep. Okay, 2 minutes left.
Is there a dog?
Yeah, there is. Let me know when you have it. And so the order is going to be like the kind of case advantage proper, the framing page, and then the critique.
Okay. Still haven't gotten the dog. But... Oh, just let me down with it. You said case starting on the advantage, then framework, then the critique.
Yeah.
Great. I'm good whenever.
Great. Plant Sol's nuclear war, new hacking coming now because of vulnerabilities in autonomous systems makes spoofing and automatic launches inevitable, which causes extinction, which they have largely conceded. Now the realism is true and inevitable. Roger 14 that if humans were better, there would be fewer wars, less terrorism, more willing to save our environment. This is false. At the road of threats to survival is not a deficit in morals, but our political arrangement. One of the basic tenets of political realism, whether human nature realism, structural realism, is that first states are the main, if not the only relevant action. Second, that states compete with power, moral consideration. Secondary, were set against survival and security. The structure compels individuals, even if humans morally enhance humanity, makes it may still face the same conclusions of moral enhancement. Political leaders dismantle nuclear weapons or literature as others, as long as the structure of politics compels them to see enemies in the future. Leaders will fail to cooperate, engage in wars, even if leaders become less power-seeking. Even if we don't have to defend all realism, just our specific instantiation of it, which they couldn't explain across examination, which should frame how you view this debate, given that they just read a bunch of generic statements without any application of things like artificial intelligence or nuclear CNC. Now, the advantage part, they say that on the loop doesn't mean humans will stop accidental launch. Yesterday, with the Murray evidence specifically says that humans can solve accidents. They say that UAVs would still thump. No, UAVs wouldn't be effective, so it wouldn't have the same implication on second strike. They recut the Johnson evidence, but it doesn't matter because our evidence, our Johnson Corbell evidence, that perception is sufficient enough to cause second strikes. So we don't need to win a huge impact. They say future cyber defense solves. No, our evidence says that cyber is coming now, and so future defense is irrelevant. They say the simple stuff. No, reject circumvention versus durable fiat. Otherwise, without it, otherwise it just devolves to we went against the status quo, which makes it impossible for the F to win. Second is that our Doherty evidence specifically says that the ban works and it's based on successful international arms control bans, which means that and it's predictive and it's kind of is not ambiguous, which should outweigh apparent in 20 in their analytics. Now, the framing stuff specifically We get to weigh the case. Anything else Musa want to see which outweighs unfairness to the impact is also clashing. It turns that Galfins any chance of effective engagement with their literature fairness is obvious because the logical conclude fairness is bad using unfair debate. The role of the judge and validator to vote for a better debater because anything else is arbitrary and self-serving. Extinction has to outweigh biological death comes first. The prerequisite of formulation of relationships to technology. If you're dead, critical evaluation are possible. B is that Vouch life is inevitable because we're biologically hardwired to intrinsically value ourselves. C is that material controls their internal link. There are arguments about securitization and femininity are relying on the idea that what happens to people matters, which means that we have to talk about our impacts, and they don't get to weigh the sum total of gender violence, which is what their empirical evidence assumes. They also can see extinction outweighs because of infinite future generations, which means that which outweighs all their offense on magnitude and Carter Evans. So you should prefer it over their analysts. They say also you can't separate epistemology from consequences. So from the consequence, so you have to evaluate our consequences. Cases also decides the also we get to weigh it regardless. They say rep shape reality is just asserted without any kind of warrant. The Hawksworth evidence is just an epistemology and of scholars, which doesn't apply to our scholars. And they say it's key to inquiry, but that doesn't apply to policymaking. Our argument is that your method is unpractical. We solve your offense with a material focus. Now the FMK permutation due the AF and ontological revisionism shields the link because engagements found in scholarship with anti-war policymaking solves feminist consciousness, solves the impacts of the link because it prevents masculine representation for party plan implementation. B is that solving extinction that benefit the all can't access it because it requires policymaking that's implement secret bases where nukes are housed. So theorization can't solve. C is that no floating picks. It seals the AF exposed factor, which makes it impossible and fields fairness that we impacted above. No link. Frame the link to make their specificity. They have to read arguments about nuclear entity theory, which they have not couldn't not answer in cross examination. Anything else is a link to the SQUO and the perm solves that. B is that we're not the arms control you're looking for. It's specific arms control that only affects things like nuclear nation, so it's not relevant. See if we win that the AF is true. You disregard the gender links because it proves that we did a rigorous and defensible answer analysis of the IR. Not all things are gendered such that they're false. And the K wouldn't agree with that claim. Nuclear threats are in masculine construction. Quartal 17 nuclear distillations of all disruptions such as some vulnerability of humans that cannot be endured. It functions like feminist politics for embracing and exploiting it. The politics of vulnerability comes an opportunity to build alliances and contest new ways of faking endemic Cold War nuclear establishment. This is not passive. It could be confrontational. Ways except humanity was held in common and political national difference. Mark national difference. It answers also the extension of the Pumper evidence. It answers their Mitchell evidence. Too. Gender is not the root cause. That's Hanivsky 12. The violence against women is co-constructed other systems of oppression, which may be more salient cardiovascular disease. Focused on gender obscures the fact that CVD is proportionally experienced by racial and low-income groups. AIDS research demonstrates that gender cannot be separate from other axes, pushing beyond a single system. There are many groups which do not identify gender oppression as a primary frame through which they understand their lives. Mark, how to understand their lives.
5 minutes. Reasons to reject the team other than like the preemptive floating picks thing.
Nope.
Okay, order is critique, then the case. Critique's going to sort of start on the framework.
Wait, so by framework, do you mean like the framing page that you?
Yeah, the framing page.
Okay, and then are you going to start on your kind of framing arguments first?
Yeah.
Okay. Is there a doc?
I know. Let me know when everyone's good. Sweet. Our interpretation is safe, informative, and alternative research should be evaluated as such, indicting their scholarship and winning that it causally affects the consequences of the plan or the way they frame the world and future consequences is sufficient to vote negative. We win that those consequences would be bad or replaces any doubt to what the plan actually does, because for the same reason that you would evaluate solvency questions or link terms prior to weighing the app, you should evaluate arguments that indict what the app actually does before weighing the fiated consequences they identify in the 1EC. That was our link turn to their sort of plan focus argument. Secondly, they've conceded our scholarship argument that indicates their sort of arguments about the importance of integrating focus on causal consequences and material solutions with methodological solutions is not good. The sort of oversaturation of prescriptive mindsets of solution-oriented thinking within mainstream IR and debate means we need an analytic overcorrection towards valuing the research process in and of itself, even if it is the case that in a vacuum valuing both equally is actively good. The line to line on the framework debate, Rob Proper, they say no word for rev-shaped reality. They just conceded multiple analytics from the 1EC. Yes, we gave robust warrant with our Middle East example. Additionally, think about how, for instance, a proposal to pass healthcare reform in the United States would be opposed by both Mitch McConnell and Frank Wilderson. Obviously, their justifications and the future entailments of that opposition are wildly different, which is why the epistemological backing of our opposition to certain things or proposal for certain things is incredibly relevant in their consequences. The consequences. They say we can't separate epistemology from consequences. Yes, this is our argument. Epistemology overburdens what consequences are, so we need to consider both, but epistemology operates as a prior sequencing question because it would determine consequences they are. Our critique isn't that women dying don't matter. Our critique isn't that extinction doesn't matter. Our critique is a calculative indict to how the app calculates and predicts extinction happening in the first place. They say fairness matters and our links were predictable. Oopsie, they conceded the 2 point on our entire framework, on our framework interpretation, which indicated 1, they can still access the case. They just have to win. Their representations don't shape reality. And 2, they conceded that our links are the 2 most predictable things in the world. I mean, come on, we indicted realism and extinction focus. If they aren't prepared to debate that, then they don't deserve your ballot in the first place. This was a conceded argument. This is a conceded argument, which means you shouldn't grant them any sort of leeway on it. The critique proper. The permutation is wrong. This will be really clear on the link debate. The top level, the justification for the permit that says just add women's analysis to the 1EC doesn't do shit. It's the same logic of add women in stir used by NGOs and governments that directly trades off with nuanced evaluation of how masculine assumptions underpin the basic tenets of statecraft. This obviously isn't a link of ambition. If the app actually had integrated gendered analysis of warfare into the 1EC, then the advantage and the plan text would be radically different because that analysis would change their predictions of how states act and what sort of scenarios are worth focusing on. The next couple of arguments indict our realism link. This is what I'm going for. I'll extend it here. Their theory of IR portrays states' gendered pursuits of hegemonic masculinity as neutral pursuits of power by normalizing masculine perspectives to the common sense foundations of international relations, which necessitates the exclusion of women. We were incredibly clear as to how the link applies to the 1EC and how it is indexed and implicates their specific scenarios. Reference the arguments I made on the case page about how their understanding of how states respond to cyber operations, what motivates arms racing, and the insecurities that drive the second strike capabilities are based on realist conception of deterrence. This will be implicated more on the case page, but this proves at a baseline we have access to the link. They created an ideological circle where the neutral visions of state and masculinity falls on the inside and hysteria and anarchy of the international arena and femininity letting the outside. This necessitates coercive tactics by states by which states, i.e. men, try to tame and conquer anarchy, i.e. women. That was Runyon and Peters evidence. There are a couple of ways to vote negative from this. First, this just a priori proves that realism excludes women from international relations since its concepts are gendered. Women that get coded along the feminine side of the binary view is too immature and too irrational to partake in decision-making model, which is sort of pedagogically important because it encourages a model of education that arbitrarily excludes women. Our framing contextualization of how if we prove link that we win means this is a reason to just sort of a priori drop them. Second, we have a spill down claim. Notions of coercing femininity in women's contextual roles in IR spills down to their fullest roles in daily life in subjection to domestic violence, which increases that domestic violence, which then is independently bad, and B, spills up to even larger conflicts. As per our Prugel evidence, which I'll extend more on the case page. Next, the line proper. They say that realism is true. I'll do my explanation of the Schoberg evidence here. Will can see that the international system is state-based, and state action is motivated by national interest, which takes out the first line in the card. But national interest cannot be narrowly defined in realist terms of power and self-help. The national interests that drive military, political, and economic decisions are socially constructed along national identity. National identity is gendered through different forms of masculinity, which requires the feminization of other states, while states are differentiable in the sense that their masculine identities and therefore interests are distinct, i.e. some states may feminize others in aggressive conquer, as stoic, dependent, or sexual, which makes the international arena a place of hierarchy rather than anarchy. The relationship between some forms of hierarchies, hegemonic masculinity, and state function is structural, proving we have the universally applicable theory of international relations. Their card is just sort of wrong. We give a better explanation of human nature of our card, specifically index how their understanding of human nature is always centered around power, just sort of reuses power as a replacement for gendered motivations and pursuits of hegemonic masculinity. This extends to the relevant actor that was already answered above. Winning this realism link turns and answers the case. Their advantages rely on assumptions of how states will act in certain scenarios, but disproving realism means that those assumptions are wrong, so the risk of the app goes to zero. I'll do more work this on the case page. This also turns the app by creating a self-fulfilling prophecy, treating masculine war making as the default mode for states, making those wars inevitable when they don't have to be. Gender national identities of state change over periods of time, and injections of feminist scholarship and feminine force policy can swing those identities, but the app realist conceptions sort of structurally preclude that. They say no arms control link. That wasn't a link. They say if they win the analysis of the app is true, that it's accurate. We've indicated it's not true. They say nuclear threats are masculine. That's not the link we're going for. They say gender violence isn't the root cause. Go to the case page. This is the extension of the Prugel evidence. I'll do it here. Patriarchal gender relations cause war as nations femininize each other to bolster hypermasculinity and conflicts which occur in a feedback loop. Prugel does in-depth statistical analysis and has author polls as a professor of IR who also emphasizes gender study and focuses specifically on war making, not just violence writ large, which is way more indexed to their evidence. Additionally, you can cross-apply all of the warrants I gave from the realism page that specifically indicate how causal assumptions in the affirmative that guide their internal link chain are based on flawed assumptions of the world, which means winning the realism links means their app is just sort of a priori wrong and there are case arguments they can't overcome.
Okay. 2 minutes. Cool. So it'll go, I guess wherever you just like flowed the realism debate, basically. Is everyone good? If we win that we're going for realism true. If we win that realism is true and guide state action, that means it has to, that it means that we win this debate because it proves the alternative is a terrible idea that makes war and extinction inevitable, and it disproves the links. It also means that this entire framework debate is inevitable because we're just defending our epistemology and what they criticize in the first place. Now, specifically extend the De Arajo evidence is fantastic. It says that specifically that states are driven by power, which overdetermines things like moral concerns. The reason why war occurs, terrorism occurs, etc. occurs because people are driven specifically by power. States that are threatened and their power is threatened to abandon ideology. Think of China with communism, where they went to a market system because it threatened their economic power, their ability for them to grow as a nation territorially and economically. Think about North Korea that moved away from its sort of communist model in order to grow its economy to support its burgeoning military program. Think about American isolationism, which was abandoned right before World War II because the Nazis in Japan threatened American power. Ultimately, they have no actual examples to kind of prove how gender actually operates within the military, within the international sphere. They talk about generally how war might be driven by masculine drives, but they just have example zero on what any of that could actually mean. And the fact that examples are the only way for you to parse between these overarching massive theories of power. It also explains things like terrorism, which are designed to act on a state's conception of power to motivate them to act, which means that only we can explain massive threats like wars, etc. If we win this argument, and it proves that realism determines that states only act within power, act with power, and if we try and frame the international system through the lens of identity, it will inevitably make war and nuclear war inevitable, which everyone has conceded caused extinction. Now, all we have to do is win that extinction outweighs the broader majority of their offense and answer this kind of nonsense turns case stuff, and we win this debate. First is that extinction has to outweigh. They have dropped all of our stuff on this. They dropped the Palmer evidences that extinction results in death of trillions upon trillions of future generations, which has to weigh on magnitude. It's carded weighing. It says that it outweighs all their moral or all other kind of moral obligations, which you should prefer carded weighing over bad spin from bad evidence. Second, that they've conceded that materiality has to shape everything else because things like sexist violence and sexual assault are specifically bad because of the material impacts that occur from it, which means in order to condemn, we have to forefront material impacts. Also, biological death is a prerequisite to any of their criticisms. All of that means that you have to forefront things like preventing extinction, which means that our impacts have to outweigh theirs. Finally, is this war stuff. Ultimately, they've conceded our argument. They don't get to weigh the sum total of all gendered violence, even if they win somehow. That they how states might how feminism can shape some states. The Prugel evidence talks about all violence ever, which they don't get to weigh the sum total of. And even if they win that, it causes we've won that it causes extinction. It doesn't guide. It also just does not guide war because they have no examples for it. But the opposite is true because war results in more gendered violence because through things like massive rape and genocide. Look, the point is realism has to be true. They have no examples, and extinction has to outweigh. Good debate.